Imagine a grand cathedral in Rome. The marble floor is lit by flickering torches. Cardinals, bishops, and priests fill the hall, their whispers blending with the heavy silence of anticipation. At the center stands a throne, draped in crimson cloth, and seated upon it is a corpse. A lifeless body, skin rotting, bones stiff, dressed in the holy robes of the papacy. A crown rests upon its skull. Its dead hand is lifted and tied so it won't fall. The stench of decay fills the air. This is not a horror story. This is not fiction. This was a real trial, nearly 1100 years ago. A trial where one pope ordered the corpse of another pope to be dug up, dressed, and prosecuted for crimes. The year was 897. The event is remembered as the Cadaver Synod, the trial of the dead pope. What would drive the Church, the most powerful institution of the medieval world, to such grotesque madness? And what does this shocking story reveal about the corruption and chaos that reigned in Rome? Stay with us, because today we unravel one of the darkest, strangest trials in human history. Welcome to the channel, where we bring you the forgotten and bizarre episodes of history. The tales so strange you'd think they were made up. If you love exploring dark secrets of the past, hit subscribe and join our growing community of history seekers. Now, let's step back into the 9th century, when Rome was a city of intrigue, chaos, and corpses. The 9th century was not the Rome of Caesar, nor the Rome of emperors. The mighty Roman Empire had long since collapsed, leaving behind a city struggling to find its place in a violent, fragmented world. Rome was now the heart of Christendom, ruled not by emperors, but by popes. But the papacy was no shining beacon of faith and order. It was a throne constantly fought over, a prize in the brutal game of politics. Every noble family in Rome wanted their man on the papal throne. Armies were raised, alliances made and broken, bribes exchanged. Assassinations, poisonings, imprisonments. These were not rare events, but everyday politics. The papacy was less about holiness and more about survival. It was in this world of chaos that Pope Formosus rose to power. Formosus had not been an ordinary priest. For years, he had been a powerful figure in the Church, serving as a bishop, traveling across Europe, and influencing kings and emperors. He had both friends and bitter enemies. His enemies accused him of ambition, of reaching too high. When Formosus finally became pope in 891, he inherited a Rome torn apart by factions. One side supported the Carolingian dynasty, the empire of Charlemagne's descendants. The other favored the local Italian dukes and lords. Formosus tried to balance these powers, but his choices made him dangerous enemies. He crowned kings, he played politics, he shifted loyalties when needed. And, in the unstable world of the papacy, such actions were deadly. But Formosus reigned for 5 years. 5 years of delicate alliances, shaky diplomacy, and constant threat. When he died in 896, many thought his story had ended. He was buried with the dignity of a pope. Rome moved on, or so it seemed, because, in the shadows, hatred still burned. One man in particular, the next pope, Stephen VI, carried that hatred like a weapon. To him, Formosus was not a pope to be remembered. He was a rival to be destroyed. But Stephen would not be content with destroying Formosus' memory. No, he would destroy the man himself, even in death. And so, 1 year after Formosus was laid in his grave, Rome was about to witness a trial unlike any other in human history. The trial of a corpse. The death of Pope Formosus in 896 should have closed a turbulent chapter. His enemies could finally breathe easier. But in Rome, peace never lasted. His successor, Pope Boniface VI, died within just 15 days. Whispers spread through the streets of Rome, whispers of poison, of political murder. And into this vacuum stepped Pope Stephen VI, a man whose short reign would become infamous in ways no one could have imagined. Stephen was not secure on the throne. He had powerful enemies, and he lived under the shadow of Formosus' decisions. Some factions still supported Formosus' choices, his alliances, his ordinations. Stephen wanted to erase them all. But to erase a pope's legacy was no easy task, unless you proved that Pope had never been legitimate in the first place. And so, Stephen conceived an idea both brilliant and monstrous. He would not simply condemn Formosus in words. He would put him on trial. Not his writings, not his decrees. The man himself. A year had passed since Formosus' death. His body lay buried in the earth. Yet Stephen ordered the grave to be opened. The corpse was dragged from its tomb, decayed, stiff, grotesque. Priests washed what they could, dressed the remains in the full vestments of the papacy, and placed the tiara upon its head. Then, the body of Pope Formosus was carried into the Basilica of St. John Lateran, the cathedral of the popes, and seated on a throne. Imagine the sight. A blackened corpse slumped on a golden chair. Its skull barely held upright, its papal robes glittering under candlelight. The faithful crossed themselves in horror. Some vomited from the smell, yet no one could leave. This was not a funeral. It was a court of law. Stephen had summoned a synod, a church council, to witness this grotesque spectacle. Bishops, priests, and cardinals filled the chamber. Soldiers stood guard. Everyone knew the trial was a shame, but everyone also knew refusing to participate could mean their own downfall. Thus began the Cadaver Synod. The trial opened with a silence so heavy it seemed to crush the air. Pope Stephen sat as judge, his eyes burning with fury. Before him, on the throne, was the corpse of Formosus. But a corpse cannot speak. So Stephen appointed a young deacon, a terrified man, to stand beside the body and answer in its name. Imagine the horror. A living man forced to act as the lawyer for a rotting corpse. Stephen rose and pointed an accusing finger at the dead pope. His voice thundered across the basilica. "You, Formosus," he shouted, "have betrayed the Holy Church. You were Bishop of Porto, and yet you dared to claim the throne of St. Peter. You have violated the sacred canons. You have lied, deceived, and corrupted. Tell us, by what right did you dare?" The corpse, of course, said nothing. The deacon stammered, whispering feeble defenses. But his words were drowned by Stephen's rage. Witnesses were called, not to testify truthfully, but to echo the Pope's accusations. Bishops nodded. Priests muttered prayers. The air stank of incense and decay. The charges against Formosus were absurd. They accused him of ambition, of serving as a bishop in two places at once, of breaking ancient laws. But it did not matter whether the charges made sense. The outcome was already decided. As the trial dragged on, Stephen's anger grew. He screamed at the corpse. He shook his fists at it. He demanded answers from a mouth that could no longer move. Some say he even had the deacon slap the corpse to humiliate it. Others claim the body's head fell forward, and attendants tied it back up so the defendant would not appear disrespectful in court. The bishops sat in frozen horror. They dared not oppose. To defy Stephen was to risk death, so they nodded, murmured their agreement, and allowed the farce to continue. Hours passed. The absurdity deepened. The audience of priests, soldiers, and citizens could barely comprehend what they were witnessing. A pope was dragging another pope's body through a sham trial, all to erase his memory. Finally, the verdict was reached. Formosus was guilty. Guilty of ambition, guilty of unlawfully seizing the papacy, guilty even in death. The punishment would not merely strip away his dignity, it would desecrate his very body. Stephen ordered that Formosus be torn from his throne. The papal vestments were ripped from the corpse. The sacred robes of white and gold were pulled away, leaving only the stinking flesh beneath. Then came the cruelest act of all. The corpse's right hand, the hand that once gave blessings, was hacked apart. The 3 fingers used for making the sign of the cross were cut off. The once holy body, now mutilated, was dragged across the basilica floor like trash. And yet Stephen was not done. He ordered that the corpse be thrown into a common grave. But even this could not satisfy his hatred. Soon after, the body was dug up again and cast into the waters of the Tiber River, as if to wash it from memory forever. The Cadaver Synod was over, but its consequences were only beginning. The cadaver sank beneath the current, carried away into obscurity. But the story did not end there. In Rome, whispers began to spread. Whispers that the body of Formosus did not stay hidden in the river. Whispers that it washed ashore, retrieved by monks or by common people who still loved him. Some said miracles began to be reported near his resting place. The corpse condemned by Stephen was becoming a relic of resistance, and resistance was growing. At first, fear silenced Rome. Few dared to speak against Stephen VI. After all, if a dead pope could be dragged from his grave and humiliated, what chance did the living have? But fear cannot last forever. The grotesque spectacle of the Cadaver Synod had shocked the conscience of the people. Even those who had disliked Formosus were horrified by what had been done. To put a corpse on trial was one thing. To mutilate it, desecrate it, and throw it into the river was something else entirely. Rumors spread like wildfire. Some claimed to have seen visions of Formosus rising from the Tiber, dressed in glowing robes, his fingers restored, his blessing hand raised against Stephen. Others believed God himself was sending warnings, earthquakes, storms, disasters that seemed to strike in the weeks after the synod. But the people began to whisper a dangerous idea, that Stephen VI was cursed. Soon, the whispers became shouts. The Roman mobs, never shy of violence, turned against their pope. Angry citizens filled the streets, demanding justice for the dead. Clergy who had remained silent now began to voice their disapproval. Even bishops who had obeyed Stephen during the trial began to regret their cowardice. The revolt grew so strong that Stephen was forced to flee, but there was nowhere to hide. He was seized, dragged from the Lateran palace, and thrown into prison. There, stripped of allies, stripped of power, Stephen VI faced the same fate he had inflicted on others. In August of 897, barely a year after the Cadaver Synod, Stephen was strangled to death in his cell. The people who once trembled before him now rejoiced at his downfall. For Rome, it was not just the death of a tyrant, it was a cleansing, a way of erasing the horror of the synod. But the echoes of the trial would not fade so easily. In the years that followed, the Church tried to heal the wound. Later, popes annulled the acts of the Cadaver Synod, declaring it invalid, a madness never to be repeated. The body of Formosus, it is said, was recovered and reburied in the basilica with honor. His dignity, at least in death, was partially restored. Yet the memory of the trial remained, a grotesque reminder of how far ambition, hatred, and corruption could twist the very institution meant to represent holiness. And for the people of Rome, it was a warning. No matter how powerful a pope may be, the mob of Rome could always rise against him. Thank you for watching this journey into one of history's darkest chapters. If you enjoyed this story, remember, the past is full of tales just as shocking, strange, and unbelievable as this one. And here we bring them to life. So don't forget to subscribe, hit the notification bell, and share this video with anyone who thinks history is boring. Because after a story like this, who could ever call it boring again? This was the story of the Cadaver Synod, the trial of a dead pope. We'll see you in the next episode, where history gets even stranger.